Hello, students, colleagues, and anyone else interested who might be watching this video. My name is Professor Roy Wogelius. I'm a professor of geochemistry at the University of Manchester, and I'm making this video to explain what's going on with respect to the industrial action between university lecturers and the people who manage universities in the UK. Before I get started, I want to explain a couple of terms. There's some acronyms here that some of you may not be aware of. The first is the union that I'm a member of, the union that's called the strike action and other industrial action. It's the UCU, that stands for the Universities and College Union, and they represent the academics in our negotiations with management. Management of universities in the United Kingdom is represented by a body called UUK, that's Universities UK. And so all the universities that are involved in this industrial action, which includes the University of Manchester, have representation on this board, and they make the decisions and the negotiations on behalf of the universities. And the final acronym that I want to explain is USS, that's Universities Superannuation Scheme. They are the people, or the body, that's in charge of our pensions. And they're supposed to be managing that pension on behalf of the members of a pension. And they have not been doing a very good job. And that's a big part of the reason why there's been such industrial action. So I want to explain a few things. I wanted to get the players right, the dramatis personae, first of all. Now, one thing that I wanted to explain is that the university management has followed a divide and conquer type of strategy, which actually hasn't worked. And a big part, in fact, a big part of what it's done is it's made undergraduate students understand very clearly what we face as academics. I'll just use one example of that. At the height of the pandemic, you were all told that you had to be on campus in order to have face-to-face teaching. So in the middle of a pandemic, you all had to travel, get to your universities, get into your halls of residence and other accommodation, which it really didn't make any sense to force people to travel at the height of a pandemic because it transmitted the virus all over the country. And then as soon as you got there, they locked you down. Okay, so you were told about face-to-face teaching, and then you had to go into Zoom lectures like this one. And it doesn't make any sense unless you think about the money. And the whole point of forcing you to do that was to minimize people asking for tuition deferments, people asking for a gap year. It made sure that you had to pay tuition because your university experiences were going to be delivered. And the other thing it did, by forcing you on campus, it meant that you had to pay your rent. So really, you weren't treated very well to make sure that the university got their money that year. And I think that really sensitized students towards the fact that this wasn't really about public health or public education, it was about money. And I think that is why we've had so much support from students, which we're all very grateful for, understanding that university management has tried to do exactly the same thing to the academics. And so that's actually created quite a bit of solidarity because you can see that different parts of the equation are being treated the same way. And then there's a third part to this, which is probably worth talking about, and that is the professional support staff, the non-academics, but the people who do the timetabling and administer the grants and do all the student support, organizing your exam scores and all of that. You probably don't realize this because this isn't talked about and it's not in the newspapers, but because the universities are so worried about money, they've had an awful lot of redundancies. So a lot of them have been voluntary. They've given people packages to try and help them make a decision to go, but they also haven't renewed people's contracts. So people on short-term contracts have been just let go. And that's why the third factor in this equation, the support services, have been so terrible. We don't have enough people doing IT support. We don't have enough people administering the students. We don't have enough people administering the grants. And that's another financial squeeze. So this is all about money, right? That's very clear. I think students understand that. I think all my colleagues understand that. And it's a rush to cut costs without thinking about the consequences. And that's exactly what's been done to the academics as well. But I wanted to make clear that I understand that the support staff are under very, very similar threat. So, all right, that's fine. But with respect to the strikes, let me talk a little bit about what we're trying to accomplish. And also, why do we have relatively, why do we have disengagement amongst an awful lot of the academics? And I'm sensitive to that, and I want to address that directly. And I wanted to try and explain why I think that is. I think an awful lot of it, of the disengagement among academics, it comes from this overwhelming sense of futility. It's a complicated set of disputes that are going on, and our management has shown time and time again that they're completely deaf to criticism. They won't listen. And so it's very easy to disengage and just think, well, nothing I do is going to make a difference. So why should I strike? Why should I support the union? Well, now, if you don't believe me that people have a sense of futility, let me just share my screen for a minute. I'm only going to show a couple of graphics, but let me do that quite relatively quickly. So this is the results of the University of Manchester staff surveys between 2013 and 2019. I don't have a comparable, anything more recent, because this type of survey hasn't been done for a while. And I can tell you with great certainty, if this type of survey were taken right now, all of these responses would be even worse. I mean, people like working in universities. They're exciting, right? Cutting edge. There's, the same reason why students want to get an education. That's why we want to work here, because it's exciting and it's fun and it's noble. But this only speaks for the University of Manchester, but I think sector-wide we get very, very similar things. Our senior leadership team, so that's what SLT stands for, over the last nearly decade, our staff survey has shown that our trust in senior management has gotten worse and worse and worse. And down here at the bottom, the senior leadership team listens. Well, they don't. They've shown time and time again they do not listen to staff concerns. In a lot of ways, we're treated with contempt. That's why these scores are so bad. And I'm relatively confident if we had a 2022 version of this, we'd be down to maybe 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 people actually believe that they're being listened to. And that's pretty bad when you have a workforce of highly trained academics who actually can contribute a lot. And I think that's one of the key reasons why people just feel really, really disengaged. Now, there's another reason why I think people are disengaged. And I think a lot of that has to do with the propaganda that we're all fed on a daily basis. And it's about the fact that the union is ineffective. That's nonsense. It's not true. The union has actually been quite effective. I'll give you a couple examples of that. Back in 2017, the University of Manchester management sent out an email saying that they were going to make, there was 171 redundancies, and they were going to be compulsory. So there's hundreds of years of academic tradition where academic jobs are decided based on academic merit. That was going to be completely subverted, and the decision was going to be management, and managers were going to make the decision about who keeps their jobs and who doesn't. And part of the criterion that they explicitly set was going to be how many days off you taken on sick leave or personal leave. So one of the criterion about whether you could keep your job was if you'd been ill. So good Lord, don't get cancer and don't have a sick child, because that ruins your employment record and maybe we don't want you anymore. It was a terrible, terrible way to go about business. The university management was told not to do that, but they kept that in as their criterion. And so my colleagues and I struck, and we were very clear about this. We did not want this to happen. And the strike was so effective that that was pulled back. So we saved an awful lot of academic jobs. And pardon me, indeed, I think we saved a very, very long-standing academic tradition, where it's academic merit and not management expedience that decides on academic careers. And at the same time, in 2017, universities made the decision that they were going to throw away our pensions. The pension that we have was just going to be thrown into the dustbin of time. It's our deferred income. So we, relative to the to industry, we take lower wages, and that deferred income goes into our pensions. But categorical trashing of our pensions. The whole scheme was going to be thrown in the bin, despite the fact that it's one of the most successful pensions in Europe. For ideological reasons and also for monetary reasons, this was going to be gotten rid of. The union took action and struck, and that extremely good pension actually has been saved for nearly 5 years now. So in 2022, it still exists. So the union's been quite effective with that. Now, quite recently, USS, which, as far as I'm concerned, is completely useless and has actually acted to the disbenefit of its members, has forced through another set of reforms. And they're trying to get rid of our pensions. They're still working on trying to get rid of our pensions. But even with this most recent terrible version of our pension, we have managed to salvage a large chunk of what makes our pension scheme good. So we're still on a footing where, with a little bit of effort, we can bring that pension back to being the kind of thing that attracts people to academia. We need some help to finish that off, but we've kept it on the table. And without a union, your great pension scheme that university academics enjoy would have been killed 5 years ago, and it would be off the table. There would be no, absolutely no way of keeping it alive. But we've kept it alive, but we need help to make that final stretch. It's tremendously important. Now, I've said some relatively negative things about USS and UUK, and I'm going to back that up now with another graphic. And quite frankly, it's nearly unbelievable. So this is how the assets in our pension scheme have grown since 1996. And you can see it's nearly an exponential curve. It's increasing. Now, in order to get rid of our pensions, which I said are actually quite successful, the investments have been successful, people pay into it, it's growing. First, they tried to make some models about the fact that it wouldn't grow so fast. So we go back to 2011. It's called a prudent assumption. Now that's a bit of doublespeak. I would call it a fictitious assumption. And our pension fund didn't grow anywhere near that. It way outpaced what USS wanted us to believe. And every successive set of assumptions about how our assets are going to grow has gotten worse and worse and worse, despite the fact, pardon me, that our fund has been growing. Well, it's doing extremely well. There's no reason to get rid of our pension. It's tremendously successful. I mean, you can get rid of it. First of all, they want to save money because money is the most important thing to universities these days. And also, there's a government drive, an ideological and political drive to get rid of our pensions because our pensions are socialism, right? And that can't possibly work. Well, of course it does. It's just exactly like the attack on the NHS, exactly the same ideological attack. So you create these fabrications to make it look as if our pension fund is failing. It's not failing, not at all. And this is the most recent assessment here. Prudent assumptions. Basically, for this kind of growth curve, you'd have to have the end of capitalism. All the investments fail and the pension fund becomes worth less and less and less over time. It's total nonsense. It's a complete nonsense. It's a complete fabrication. Even the Financial Times has called this essentially crazy, right? And this is how it's actually grown. And it's carried on growing like that. And so this is why we're so upset about what's happening to our pensions and why we need to fight this, because it's actually dishonest. And, you know, I think we have to stand up for honesty. So we've managed to save this for a few years, but we need to go back in. We need to vote on industrial action in the future, and we need to get our pension fully reinstated, which is not where we're at right now. In fact, USS has forced this valuation through, and it was done at the lowest point of the pandemic in order to make our assets look as bad as possible. Well, since that time, our assets, in fact, have grown again, and there is no deficit. And in fact, we're paying a penalty right now for deficit, even though there is no deficit. It's completely ridiculous. It's hard to believe, actually. It's hard for me to believe that adults can do this kind of thing to other professionals and feel no pangs of conscience. I don't understand that at all. It's in a rational society, this would be criminal negligence. But anyway, in my opinion. So this is what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to deal with this problem with respect to our pensions. We have delayed the worst case. We are trying to stop this assault. We're trying to stop this political attack on our pensions. And we need the academics in this sector to pull together, take action, and stop this. When we work together, we can be effective. But we need people to join the union. And those of you who are in the union, we need you to vote yes, that you will take action to support this and to keep USS and UUK from ruining the futures of academics in the United Kingdom. Now, there's another aspect to this, which is about our pay. We've been struggling to get a decent pay deal from universities. Now, there's been a 5-day strike, which will finish soon, and we're balloting to carry it on because there has been a little bit of action. So this is another case where we've actually made some progress. I don't know if you know this, but the graduate teaching assistants up until now didn't get sick pay. So if you're a graduate teaching assistant and you depended on some of your demonstrating income and you got COVID, well, tough luck. You know, people who work for McDonald's get treated better than that. Now, we're supposed to be this shining example of, of the future, and yet we treat young people that way. It's just horrible. But through this kind of action, we put these kinds of things on the table, and conditions have actually gotten better. So those are several actually really important things that the union has been able to do for the people that work in this sector. And I'm actually quite proud of that, quite pleased with that. But it only works through collective action. You know, I talked about that feeling of disengagement, that feeling that the university management doesn't listen to you. Well, the one way to get them to listen is through the union. That's about the only way that we can get them to listen. So let's go on to the pay deal, which the pay and conditions are part of this whole idea of sick pay for GTAs. You probably realize that inflation has been relentless, and right now it's really quite bad, and it's probably going to get worse before it comes back down again. Now, university bosses have shielded themselves from inflation for quite a while now, while throwing academic staff and support staff to the wolves. They keep claiming that there is no money, and they offer staff these tiny, tiny increments while they give themselves whopping great pay rises, which means there must be money in the system somewhere. And they have the audacity to tell us that, well, we can't give you a pay rise, but because of inflation, we need you to bring in 10% more in research income year on year. But we won't pay you anymore. You just have to work harder and bring in more money because inflation is affecting us. Well, what do you think it's doing to us? What do you think it's doing to the people who work for you? And what this means is that conditions are so bad in academia. There was a survey done just last week. 81% of academics want to leave. People who are in the higher age brackets, well, they don't see the point of paying into their pension schemes any longer because the pension scheme is being gutted. And people beginning their career don't see a future because they don't see the pension fund being available when they get to be of retirement age. And the pay isn't very good. And it's being degraded year on year. And I'll show you, this is the final graphic I wanted to show you. This is what's happened to pay. Now, this is how VC pay, so the vice chancellors, the big bosses of all the universities in the UK. So this is sector-wide. This isn't just University of Manchester. So, you know, they felt a little bit of the squeeze after the banking crisis. And then they've turned that around and, you know, they've been doing okay. They've been winning since 2014, giving themselves big pay increases. Now, their salary is a couple £100,000 only, but they have a pay packet, or let's say a benefits packet, that brings their pay up to hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds. £633,000 would not be uncommon amongst vice chancellors. And look what's happened to lecturers down here, the red curve. Every year since 2010, we've been losing ground relative to inflation. Now, 2020, nearly 10% down relative to inflation. The current pay offer that's on the table from the universities UK is probably going to see this shortfall double once we see what happens to inflation over the next year. So instead of being 10% behind inflation, we're probably going to go down to 15, maybe even 20% down. Now, the pay packet that our union is trying to get for us wouldn't bring us back up to this zero, but it would be better than the very small 1.5% pay rise that they've offered, which is minuscule in the face of very high inflation. And you know, this thing about, oh, we don't have any money, well, that's not true actually. There's over a £2 billion operating surplus in the university sector, and there's 44 billion in cash reserves. Now, if we're in a system in crisis, when there's a crisis, that's when you dig into your reserves a little bit and reward the people that are working to get you out of the crisis and deal with the pandemic, deal with the aftershocks of that. But they won't listen. And that's also, it's part and parcel. I understand that's part and parcel of the disengagement. But if we pull together as a union, we can turn that around. And what we're asking for is not unreasonable. It makes a lot of sense. Now, there are other issues with respect to this discussion about pay, and they have to do with the unequal pay for minorities and women and disabled people. And all of that is a noble endeavor that the union is working on to try and get a fair deal, not only in terms of aggregate pay, but across the board for all the people who work in the universities, which seems like the right thing to do. And so the question I have is, why would you not engage with that? What is it about management that makes them unable to engage with the union about a fair pay deal and an equitable pay deal for the people who work for you? What is so hard about engaging with that? I really don't understand that. So something here is terribly wrong. We're not being listened to. Our profession is being degraded in every way possible. The university experience for students is being degraded in every way possible. The conditions for support staff are being degraded in every way possible. I was trying to explain this to someone outside the Williamson building, and they're saying, oh, well, I don't know if I can do anything. Oh, you know, university staff, the management won't listen. And I know this because I've worked here for 27 years. I was standing in front of the Williamson building. There is not one person in that building who feels like their opinions are being listened to. Not one. So what do? Do you give up? Do you just say it's not worth it? Frankly, I think British academia is worth something, and I do think it's worth standing up for, and I do think it's worth doing something about. And I think the way to do that, given the fact that all these other communication venues have been shut down, about the only thing that's left to us is to organize and make our voices heard through the union. And I want to leave this with something that's quite personal. I really don't like doing this. I'm not some wild-eyed Marxist activist, hatched from some red flag in the past. No, no. I'm an academic, and that's what I want to do. And I want to teach the students. I want to do research, and I want to support my colleagues and create knowledge, all those great things that we do. But I cannot, and I will not, be complicit in a system that's trying every way possible to take the future away from my younger colleagues. And by doing that, what management doesn't see is they're ruining a profession that should provide a wellspring of hope for every generation yet to come. And by undermining that, they're taking that future not only away from my colleagues, but from everybody. And I just don't think I could live with myself if I didn't stand up and do something about it. So I hope you understand what's going on. And to my colleagues, please, why don't you help make this a better system? You have a choice and you have a chance to do that. Please help us. Help yourself, help the students, and help your colleagues. Thanks for listening, folks. Have a good rest of the day, wherever you are and whatever you're doing.